Hi Ken, Barbie mate. Oh, how's it going?
Oh, Tess, how are you?
Grand, yeah.
Good, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
What's the story with?
What?
Well, you've got
What?
a lot of on your ear.
I'm here, is it? Oh.
Yeah, looks sore.
Oh.
Jesus Christ. Is
You
it
all
alright?
Yeah, no, it's grand. It's grand. I've been riding the Aprilia again.
Oh,
The Tuareg. The
oh,
Tuareg.
Jesus
Yeah,
Christ,
yeah.
that's what happened to your ears.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God.
That hams. That hams. Yeah, that's normal. Yeah. That's yeah, Tuareg. That's a Tuareg for you.
God.
Yeah, it's okay. It's fine. They're all like that. It's all right.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. It's fine. It's fine. Well, look at what I got here. An Aprilia Tuareg 660. What a fantastic bike. I'm totally smitten by it. It's the bike that the other manufacturers can't afford to make. What do I mean by that? Well, let's have a look. Who's the competition in Aprilia for this bike? They don't do any other bikes like an adventure bike like this. So they can afford to make this. It's not hurting anybody else in their range. But you say they're owned by Piaggio. So who's their other competition? The closest, it's going to be Moto Guzzi, isn't it? With the V85 TT. But what's that? It's a modern air-cooled adventure classic. Yeah, I think I'll call it that. A modern air-cooled adventure classic, the V85 TT. I don't think it's competition for this, really. I don't think it's better or worse. I'm just saying I think the two bikes appeal to different people. So this has a much more off-road capability, and the V85 is much more of a tourer. So adventure tourer. So I don't think there's any internal competition in Piaggio there. Who else have we got? Derby. Let's have a look. No competition there then. That's it. So no internal competition. They can do what they like with this bike. So that's exactly what they've done. They've given it off-road credentials coming out of its pores, but have given it cruise control and tube tyres and adjustable suspension. This is a fantastic road bike, an absolutely brilliant road bike. And if you're into off-road, a great off-road bike. Now, I'm not an off-roader, so this is going to be very much a road focus rundown on this bike. How would I characterize this bike? If I was to sum it up, it's an uncomplicated but feature-rich bike equipped with a large frame chassis and a class-leading carrying capacity. It has enough equipment for the longest of road trips while retaining the features for casual or more challenging off-road adventures. What do you mean that's just an incoherent string of bloody words? And that's a real characterisation, isn't it? Gobbledygook. Well, it was a bit long, I suppose. All right, yeah, but I'm still going for it. So when I said this is the bike that other manufacturers can't afford to make, who am I thinking of? Well, the first two that stick in my mind, first off, the Honda Transalp. Okay, the new 750 Transalp. It's a great looking bike. I'm a Honda fan. I have a Honda just over there. I love Hondas, and I think it looks great, that new Transalp, especially in the white colour. It's 1,300 euros more than this in my geography here in Ireland. In the UK, I think it's 1,101 pounds. This is dearer than the Transalp. So you're thinking Transalp, bargain, bigger engine, another 10 horsepower on top of this as well. Is it a bargain though? Is it? It's got, let's put it this way. If someone said to you, if you were down the dealer buying a Transalp, and the dealer said to you, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 40 or 50 mil extra suspension travel. I'll make your suspension fully adjustable front and rear for compression and rebound. And I'll convert your wheels to tubeless front and rear. And I'll fit cruise control. And it's only going to cost you 1,300 euros. Would you upgrade your Transalp? You'd bite his arm off. The Transalp 750 is so emasculated They're so afraid of taking market share. It's competition for their own bike. They're so afraid of taking market share from the Africa Twin. They don't want to start clawing into the Africa Twin market. So Honda Corporation are keeping that Transalp down. Oh my God, I would so take this over the Transalp. And I think the Transalp is a good looking bike. Who else? Okay, Suzuki V-Strom DE, the new DE. That's nearer in price to this. It does have adjustable suspension, that's great. But look, it's a bit ugly, isn't it? No, it's really ugly. I bet it's a lovely engine and all that sort of stuff. I've never ridden it, but it's a big ugly. And again, that's Suzuki. Tubed tires, tube wheels. Look, I know if you're like really into off-road, and it does have lovely adjustable suspension. I'll give that to the Suzuki. Long travel, adjustable suspension, top marks. But then tube tires, and I know if you're a hardcore off-road guy and you dent your rim, you're happy with that tube because it's going to keep your tire up and everything like that. But most people who buy these bikes aren't hardcore anything. They're people like me. If this was my bike, it would spend 98% of its time on the road. And if I was 2% off-road, it's because I got lost. So I really appreciate the tube tires on this. And I think that Transalp there's going to be a flurry of sales as people buy them. And then when people are like 250 miles from home with a puncture that they can't fix themselves and they have to call the tow truck, I don't know. It's like, you know, I think most most people who are going to buy a Transalp, they're not looking for tubes. They're not looking for tube wheels. To sum it up, would you pay Honda an extra 1,300 euros or 1,100 pounds for adjustable suspension, an extra 50 mil of travel, tube tyres and cruise control? Of course you would. Of course you would. And when you consider that Transalp price as well, you're getting some big old rubbery brake lines. Well, we're getting some nicer lines here on this bike, not those horrible old-fashioned big rubbery things, which you get on the Transalp. And you'll pay an extra £400 sterling for the skid plate. I couldn't find my euro price. So, you know, that 1,300 euro difference between this and the price of the Transalp, that gap's closing all the time if you just add a few more extras. But you can't configure your Transalp like this. And you might say, look, you're getting the reliability of the Honda. Yeah, the Honda have a fantastic reputation for reliability and it's well earned and all that sort of stuff. But I actually haven't seen a load of negative stuff from Tuareg owners. The most I've ever seen are people in hot countries complaining a bit of engine heat. Living in Ireland, we're never going to suffer from that. So yeah, that's a non-issue here. Word of warning about this. I say word of warning. Yeah, no, it's not really a word of warning, is it? No. I'll tell you what I found. The guy whose bike this is, he's about my weight. So I was happy using this bike and adjusting the suspension and giving it to him, knowing that he'd be happy with the way this bike was set up. But I have to tell you, he bought this bike from brand new. It wasn't a demo model, and he's never adjusted the suspension, anything, preload, damping, anything, front, back, anything. So before I wanted to get out and ride on this bike, I checked the tire pressures. They were a good 6 psi down, front and back. Okay, that's down to him. Vincent, check your tire pressures a bit more often. So put those right. The suspension was way out of this bike, way out from the factory. It's brand spanking new, so the user hadn't adjusted it. The front preload was a mill out. The front compression damping was too soft. And the rear preload was wound right back off. Now when I say that, I mean from factory configured settings. So before I wanted to adjust anything on this bike, I set everything back to stock. So it's all back to where it should be. I'll go through some sag settings with you actually of me sitting on the bike. Now it is particular to me, to my 18.5 stone, but it might just give you some ideas on the rear preload on this. So when I got on the bike with that rear preload set at 5 clicks, I actually used well over 40% of this rear suspension. So I knew I knew something was up. So once I put the rear preload back to stock, which is 10 clicks in, my 18.5 stone, I ended up using 37% of that rear shock travel. So I decided to set myself a target of 30%. And I set off up in the Wicklow Mountains and I left it at stock for now, knowing that, okay, I know this is the absolute base. I'm at 37% sag at the rear with the preload in the factory position. I know because on my way I can add more and try and aim for that 30%. And I want to see what the effect is on the steering and the handling of this bike as I bring this shock. And of course, all I'm trying to do there is compensate for my weight and bring that rear shock into further up its compression stroke, so around about that 30% mark. You'll see in my demo rides, I stop a few times, adjust it, and I'll go through at the end what he ended up settling on. But look, this is the sort of thing you can go through on your own bike with adjustable suspension to get it working perfectly for you. It might be you needed less preload and less damping because you're a very light rider. And you know, when it comes to weight, it's always that rear shock. It's always that rear shock. The impact of your weight on that front end isn't as a big a deal as it is on that rear end. And that's why lots of bikes don't come with any preload adjustment on the front end. My GS doesn't, my Tiger 1200 didn't, but this does. So that just goes to show this was a brand new bike out of the dealership and the suspension was all over the place. So when you get your brand new bike, or you buy a demo bike or a second-hand bike off a dealer, get the user manual. If it doesn't come with a bike, download it off the web, find out what the stock suspension settings are, and set everything back to stock to start with. I'd also set the TFT and the rider modes and all that back to factory default as well. So let's pick that apart a little bit. Uncomplicated features. You start the dash, there's so little to the dash, it's so easy to understand. There's a handful of rider modes, 4 rider modes, 2 road modes, they're set for optimum, perfect. There's an off-road mode and there's a custom mode. It's so easy to understand the display on this thing and set those parameters up. But simple things like, let's say you were going down the road, you could quickly change to your off-road mode, and the cruise control switch doubles as your traction control switch. So on the fly there, you can just change the traction control. The right-hand switch which you choose for rider modes, well, if you're in your off-road mode, all you have to do is hold that button for an extra few seconds and you can change your ABS, whether it's front on only or completely off. So it's simple. There's no great layer of menus or anything like that. The rest of the bike is fairly straightforward. No 6-axis IMU or anything like that. It's just traction, ABS, engine braking, and throttle map. Manual suspension, front and rear, but infinitely adjustable. And boy, is it adjustable. I've had great fun taking this bike up and down the Wicklow Mountains for hundreds of kilometers, getting used to the suspension, tuning it up. For me, I'm a heavy rider, so I obviously have a bit of an impact on this bike. I'm 18.5 stone. And I've adjusted the suspension on this bike to make it brilliant on the road for me and my weight.
Well, what a bike. I've been riding this Tuareg around for a couple of hours now and I've got a beautiful evening for it. What I've done is, so I have the suspension set to complete factory stock and I know I've used more than 30% sag, and I'm going to experiment with this over the next few days. I'm going to raise the rear end a bit more, but even in stock position where I'm overusing my rear suspension, the bike handles very well, very well. You know, so I heard one reviewer on this who was a large-ish chap who said the bike understeered a bit, and it was like, look, nobody, especially someone like Aprilia, are going to make a bike that requires an opposite lock to steer. He was suggesting, you know, you just use a bit of counter steer and it'd be great. No, that was because you're heavy and you had the bike sitting down at the back, you increase the trail. If anyone tells you they need to counter steer on their bike, they haven't adjusted their preload at the back. I'm loving the engine so far. It's all induction noise. Everything's induction noise on this thing. These sort of roads around here, perfect for this bike. And in the knowledge that I've gone through all the suspension to make sure it's a complete factory setup. There's so much adjustment on this. I know what I'd probably want to do after being out in a couple of hours. I know I'm going to add a little bit more preload at the back and a little bit more rebound damping at the back, but it's coping with these roads brilliantly at the moment. Very comfortable suspension wise, and that's what your suspension adjustment is for, to get it perfect for you. Right, let's continue on a bit further. As is so often the case, you get to the top of the Wicklow Mountains and it's covered in one massive cloud and it goes all grey up here. Well, I can tell you, this bike suspension is coping admirably. As I say, I have it in the stock position, everything's set to stock. Now I know, the front end's pretty good for me actually. I know I could do with more rebound damping on the back, but I suspected that anyway, being an 18.5 stone rider. But the fact that I have the option to add a little extra rebound damping, and all it takes is me doing this road 3 or 4 times and adjusting it quarter or a half turn at a time, just to add a tiny bit more control. But as it stands, I'm amazed at how good it is considering my weight. The airbox is mad, I have to say. After a while you'll be glad you have your earbuds in. The bike, it's like a bloody toy plaything. It makes you do this just for the sound. But you couldn't do that all day on tour, you'd soon get pissed off with it. So I think you'll be wearing earplugs on this on a week's tour. Its handling is great though. I really thought this was going to understeer a bit more with my weight. But I know I am using up a bit too much of the suspension at the back, so I will be upping the preload some more as well. But it's handling these road surfaces fantastically. I suppose the only thing about bikes of this sort of CC, you know, if you're with a group, you know, I don't know, riding through the Swiss Alps or something like that, sometimes it's nice to sit there with your kind of litre bike and waft along, especially if you've got a pillion. This kind of is a bit more frenetic. It does have a 6th gear, and that's very, you know, I'm in 5th there now. But you know, in 6, cruising at 100 kilometers an hour, well indicated, it's very nice. But you know it's going to be a little bit more frenetic on a motorway. I don't think you'd want to spend hours and hours on this bike on the motorway. But I know me and the sort of buddies I hang around with, we avoid motorways like the plague anyway. So for country roads like this, it's perfect. You can kind of relax on this bike, I have to say. It's a nice big frame bike, and it doesn't make 18.5 stone me look like a complete tool. You know, you got that big tank in front of you there, and the engine bars at the front there kind of beefing out a bit. It's not a vibey bike. The engine's a little bit raw, I have to say, but it's not vibey. There's no, it's not one of these super tingly smaller capacity bikes. It needs something for the fueling at the low end, it does. It's a little bit of a jerk fest in town. The first 3 gears are very lowly spaced, very short gears. You can't really go around town in first. You kind of want to do it in second, and the throttle can get a bit snatchy. But I reckon if you could put a rapid bike easy or something equivalent, one of those kind of cheapo low cost sensors that'll richen the mixture at low revs, that'd be great. I'd say get sorted straight away. it's a light bike to hoof around. I'm absolutely loving the suspension so far. Yeah, this stock suspension setting has the chassis fairly well controlled. As I say, I'd like some more rebound damping, but it has it fairly well controlled. So I'm pretty confident I could make this a bit more Luxo bargy if I wanted to waft along a bit, because there's a lot of adjustment on this, and I reckon I could make it quite a bit more sporty, a bit like the Tiger 100. I reckon I can make this quite sporty ride in 2 minutes, adjusting the damping on this. But I'm not sure you'd want to make this too sporty, given with those sort of tyres on. I don't think there'd be much point. Just the way this suspension deals with this rough surface compared to the GS. My God, it's so much better. You don't feel absolutely bloody everything.
I said this was a large frame bike with a class-leading carrying capacity. Yeah, its load capacity on this bike is 210 kilos. That's massive. That's only 6 kilos less than my GS. That's incredible for a 660 bike. Physically, it's quite a big bike. So if you are a larger rider, there's lots of real estate here for you to sit on. So you don't feel like a big rider on this bike. It's a great size. It's a great size. So if you're coming down from those larger bikes, but want some of your creature comforts like, you know, cruise control and the likes of that, this is a great bike to consider. I absolutely fell in love with this bike, riding this for the last week around the Wicklow Mountains. It's absolutely brilliant. And the adjustable suspension, which will be a little bit of a focus on me for this little review, it means so much to be able to change the suspension on this bike. You can totally change the character of this bike and match it perfectly to your riding style. So nobody thought to tell me I've done the whole presentation with a food stain on my top. No? No. Okay. You're fired. They're actually imaginary. They're not fired. They don't exist. I'm here by myself. Well, have you seen these mirrors? They're straight off the GS. Or who stole them first? Who's making them? Who's making them for BMW and Aprilia? They're identical, just a different length here.
Oh, I wish this had a quick shifter. This is a mad little Hornet. This should be called a Hornet because it sounds like a bloody Hornet when you put the revs on it. This is where I think, yeah, if you firm the suspension up a bit more than this, I think your tyres are going to be the limiting factor. Because while I'm pushing this a bit now, you can feel it squirming a bit, and I know it's the tyres, I know it's not the chassis or the suspension. Now the GS handles this corner fantastically for 1200, but because this is 50 kilos lighter, it handles it just as well. Yeah, you could just come up this road 4 or 5 times and get your damping just right for you. Yeah, tiny bit underdamped at the moment, but I knew it was going to be that way. So I've been on this bike probably about 3 hours now. I'm getting a little bit of numb bum. I know the seat isn't as comfortable as a Tiger or a GS, or, you know, it's fairly narrow. But if I was going to take this a week around Europe or something like that, I think I would, you know, maybe have some sort of pad on the seat or wear some motor skivvies or something like that. It's refreshing to have such a light bike. Do you know what I love about it? Which is one of my, you know, focus things, or things I like to focus on. I love the seat to peg distance and the peg position. My hips can my hips immediately pick up a bad seat position on a bike, and they're provided no problem whatsoever on this. The seat to peg distance is a healthy 560mm, but the seat is fairly firm, so you kind of get to keep all of that. You're not squishing down in the seat, reducing that distance. So that's actually quite a nice comfy triangle. For me, with my short arms as well, I find the bars to my shoulders and all that sort of stuff perfect. I won't need any risers or anything like that there. What a bike, what a bike. It's brilliant. It has its limitations. Like, you wouldn't want to put 3 pieces of aluminium luggage on there and a pillion. You know, because hauling all that around with just 80 horsepower, it would just be crap. But as a solo bike, great. Now, having said all that, this has a massive load carrying capability. So if I remember rightly, its wet weight is 204 kilos, but it has a 210 kilo carrying capacity. That's only 6 less than a GS. 6 kilos less than a GS for load carrying capacity. That's astonishing. But as I say, look, I didn't like going 2-up with an Africa Twin with 100 horsepower, so I know I wouldn't like this 80 horsepower 2-up. So now I'm just going to add a little bit more rear preload. I'm not going to adjust any of the damping yet, because one thing at a time. Right, that's another 5 clicks of rear preload. Let's see what goes down. Now I know I've added a bit more preload there. I know now I need a little bit more rebound damping, even more so now, because I'm compressing this spring, and there's a lot of energy in that spring, and I need to dampen some of it. And that's typical if you're adding more preload. But I can feel the bike riding a little bit higher at the back now. Now on a lot of bikes I'd also say, and I can feel it turning in so much better. But I found this bike turns in fantastically anyway. And I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure how with a 27-inch wheel and a 27-degree rake. Yeah, I bet quarter turn, half a turn on rebound damping would do it on this bike for me. I'm not concerned about the front forks. They're not giving me any grief. I keep accidentally switching the main beam on. I'm not going to change the damping on this run. I just want to concentrate on the preload and the rear specifically. I think I have given myself a little bit more manoeuvrability actually. Yeah. Because that's just pushed me a bit nose down. So I'm about 5 clicks over stock on the rear preload. It has given me a tiny bit more agility, but I was never having to counter steer. I don't want to over exaggerate this now. Oh God, I haven't got the earplugs in. I think there's blood coming out of my ears now. That airbox. Yeah, do you know, that's it. You're gonna have to regiment yourself to go out for a nice motorcycle ride. If this is a Royal Enfield 350, you'd be driving like this. You'd be driving like Miss Daisy, which is good for the body and soul. Hello, hello. Yes, it's Royal Enfield. So yeah, a fourth gear meander through the country roads without totally whacking the throttle everywhere. You need one of those induction box noise on-off buttons, because that's what makes you do that. So, can we have a leisurely ride out in the country with this bike? Yeah, look, it's coping fine with this. It's you know, once you're moving and all that sort of stuff, it's handy enough at these routes. Will it cruise here at 5th and a nice leisurely pace? It will. Okay, so if you do want a leisurely tour around the Brecon Beacons or the Wicklow Mountains and places like this, yeah, it's sitting there in 5th, coping with these pretty poor roads without being a frenetic, mad engine. And it's still got that, you know, they tuned this for the mid-range torque, so I'm sitting here in 5th. If I need to adjust my speed somewhat, okay, it's not ripping my arms off, but it's enough for what I want to do on a quiet country road like this. Now, for a road tester, if you watch a road test of this bike, and a road tester tells you at times they found the rear end a bit wallowy, yeah, that's just because it's a bit underdamped for your weight or your luggage and all that sort of stuff. You can definitely 100% take that wallowiness out of this bike, and I'm experiencing a bit of that now, but I know I can get rid of it. I know exactly what to do, and it would be very interesting to ride. See, you know, it'd be very interesting to ride the Honda Transalp. Like, I don't know why. I don't know who would buy a Transalp when this is available. 10 more horsepower, okay, but you know, sounds like quite a revvy motor, and zero damping adjustment. So if that Transalp feels a bit wallowy on the road to you, then it's always going to be wallowy. It'll never not be wallowy, because you can do nothing about it, and your preload's not going to change anything. This is a very poor piece of road. It's coping extremely well. Main headlights on, check. Flash. Cool. Oh, I got shades on. That's why it looks darker than it is. I don't need them on. So this is one of those bikes that falls into the category of, when is a tall seat height not a tall seat height? Well, when its laden seat height is very reasonable. By the time I achieve 30% sag or 35% sag on this bike, because the suspension travel is so long on this bike, 240mm, my laden seat height is quite low, and in fact with the preload in the stock position, I'm really solidly landing both my 29-inch feet. Now that was too much. I'm heavy, so I up the preload, but I'm still flat-footing it, and I'm well up on the preload. And you know, they have this set up really well. They kind of have the suspension set up, I know I've changed the preload, but the damping, they have it set up firm-ish. It's not a big super sloppy thing. It's almost like it was kind of made for, you know, European country roads. It's taut enough that the bike is not, you know, using all of its travel. So I've been on this bike about 4 hours now, and it never gets old. It never gets old. What I would say though is I should have packed some earbuds. I wouldn't normally ride without earbuds ever. I just wanted to experience this airbox. But I can tell you, after about 4 hours, I've had enough of experiencing the airbox. It's a little bit too much for all day. I think, because even at modest acceleration it's quite boomy. Now, it's exhilarating fun for a day out, you know, but I don't think you'd want to put up with it day after day. So if you were trying to keep up with a bunch of bigger bikes, you're probably going to be revving this reasonably well, and you're always going to be chucking a lot of fuel in there, getting that big airboxy noise. But I reckon it'd be just right with a pair of earbuds. It'll just be in that background, letting you know you're alive and on a great bike. It's so easy to change direction if there's something in the middle of the road, you know. Now, Aprilia give you 3 different tyre combinations, tyre pressure combinations for this bike. For rider and passenger, and off-road. And they don't use the normal sort of 36-42 as well either. So the front is 29 and the rear is 36 psi. But if you're going for a rider and passenger, they want you to put an extra 3 psi front and rear, 32, 39. But if you're going off-road, they're suggesting you go 29 front, 29 rear. So look, someone in Aprilia has, you know, mucked around with these settings and determined what's the best. To get the very best out of your bike, even that little 3 psi could make a huge difference. One word of warning about these long suspension travel adventure bikes. Don't forget, this chain, they usually have quite a lot of slack. So on this bike, it's 48mm slack between the 2 centers. So don't over tighten that chain, because you've got a lot of suspension travel on that rear wheel. Over tightening that chain will just ruin the output sprocket and the output shaft if you over tighten that. So this has a really generous 50mm or 48mm adjustment measurement. So be careful you don't over tighten that rear chain and ruin that. So 2 up on this bike. Check your tyre pressures, rear preload max, front preload, drop it down a bit, and you'll probably want some, well, they'll probably will, actually they do suggest a little bit more rebound damping on that rear shock, just to get rid of the bounce that extra weight's going to create. I love bikes with adjustable suspension. I love it. This, if you put this and a Transalp next to each other and we had to go 2 up, this every time, every single time. You will get such a controlled ride out of this if you can be bothered to change the suspension, and it's dead easy. The Transalp, you have no choice. You get what you're given. If you go 2 up in that Transalp and it ends up being a boingy thing, it's always going to be a boingy thing. I saw these tyres, Pirelli Scorpion, what are they? Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR. I saw that tread pattern at the start and I thought, I'm not going to like these. I'm not going to like these at all. But you know, they have the blocks here overlapping. This one's further out than this one. And so you're not, when you're going around a corner, you're not dropping off that block the whole way around the tyre. So it's actually, I'm quite surprised at these tyres. I really like these tyres for such an aggressive tread pattern on the road. They didn't give me any uncomfortable feelings at all. Some other little features, it has an emergency brake system, so if you brake very sharply, it'll flash the rear hazards. Small thing, but it's quite nice. Fuel tank's nice and low. This is actually the fuel pump. So the fuel is mainly stored down there, keeping a low central gravity. That's lovely. I'm not going to go through every detail in the bike. The brakes, front Brembos, fairly basic ones, but I tell you, they're sharp as nails. Diameter of the discs, who gives a crap? They work. Now, there's got to be some negatives. I can't be super positive. It's hard not to be positive about most bikes now because they're all so great in their own way. What would I be negative about? Well, look, I don't think it's a bike for 2-up riding, really. This is no good for a pillion. Would I go on a long journey with this bike? Yeah, I would. This seat's not bad. Now, I would prefer a bigger seat. I would say after a couple of hours on this seat, maybe 2.5 hours, I was getting a bit of a numb bum. But for those that want to get to a destination and do a bit of off-roading, I do understand that they're looking for that one-piece seat. They're not looking for any steps so they can move around on the bike. But there is an additional comfort seat for this, and I think I'll probably end up plumping for the comfort seat
just to give me a little bit extra. But if you got to your destination and you're doing a day's off-roading, you're going to want a seat with this profile, you're going to want to be able to move around on your bike, you're going to be standing half the time. So I actually don't think the comfort of this seat is going to be an issue if you're doing a lot of off-road days on this bike. Another negative, the luggage is very expensive for this. I made a separate video on that one quite a while back. It was quite shocking. So I would do what this owner has done. Yeah, they've gone GV here. So yeah, there's a solution to that. So it's kind of a negative, but it wouldn't stop you buying the bike. I would put the quick shifter on here. The bike doesn't come with a quick shifter. That is extra. If there was ever a bike made for a quick shifter, this is it. That engine, the induction roar, it'd be lovely. Now the gearbox is slick without it. I just think this is perfectly made for a quick shifter. Again, if I'm looking for negatives, I'm actually going to say it's a positive and a negative. The airbox induction roar. It's just here where my hands are, just under here. It's lovely, it's great, but after a while, yeah. you can get past it, yeah. You just wear earplugs, but after a while, it does get in your tits. You just need to wear earplugs. The exhaust is fine. I wouldn't change that. You can't hear it anyway because that airbox is so noisy. This protection's extra. This is SW Motec. Nice set of bars actually. Oh no, I'll tell a lie. These are, I've just seen the label. I just made that up. You just made that up. It's Hepco Becker. Nice looking bars actually. Nice looking bars. Scott oiler on the back. I bloody hate them. I bloody hate them. A tin is so much easier. I cleaned this bike a couple of rides ago. The back end looks like it's been through a war zone already. It's these bloody things. I hate them. That's not a negative. Of course, that's not an Aprilia negative. They didn't put the Scott oiler on it. What else? Yeah, I'm struggling to get the negatives. The service interval is 6,000 miles, 10,000 kilometers. That's fairly average, I suppose. And really, it's just an oil change and stuff like that. But the valve service comes around fairly quick on this at 20,000 kilometers. So yeah, that's reasonably low. I think before I bought this from a dealer, I would ask them exactly how much a full major service is going to be on this bike with the valve service included, just in case it's some silly mad number. Yeah, that 20,000 kilometer, when you think of it, that's only 12,400 miles for a valve service on this. I wonder if there's experience out there with other owners saying, look, these have been staying in spec. I don't know. I'd say you'd want to do them. I'd say this engine is fairly pushed. It's a really high compression ratio, 13 something to 1, very high. I think the engine is doing everything it can. So it might pay to look after it. I don't think I'd miss the first one, that's for sure. I mentioned the high load capacity on this, but really I don't think you would take a pillion on this because to me, 80 horsepower is not enough with a load of luggage, bags, top box, pillion on the back, and I think 80 horsepower isn't enough. So although it's not really a negative in the bike was designed to have 80 horsepower. Personally, I don't think it'd make a great two-up tourer, even though it has the load capacity for it. I don't think it has the right seat for two-up work, and I don't think it has enough horsepower for two-up work. What's more negative, the throttle can be a little bit jerky. Weirdly enough though, it's temperature dependent. I found on cooler days, it wasn't so jerky. On warmer days, it was a bit jerky. So first can be a little bit jerky. It is a very short gear, so it kind of exacerbates that. But if this was my bike, I would get one of those Rapid Bike Easies or something like that to fool the sensor and convince it the temperature was a bit different. That used to happen, it happened all the time on my Africa Twin, and I sorted that out with the Rapid Bike Easy. So yeah, a little bit jerkiness at the low end, but I know it can be sorted quite easy. So when I'm finished with my two-up touring duties, I have a GS. I want that for a large, comfortable bike to do two-up touring. But when I'm dispensed with two-up touring, do I really need a GS anymore? I would be happy to have this bike. Okay, it's not going to have the same motorway presence or freeway presence as my GS 1250. You know, this bike's kind of 45 kilos lighter. But the engine sits just under 6,000 RPM, about 5.9, something like that, at an actual 120 kilometers an hour. And it doesn't feel like it's manic. It doesn't feel like the engine's racing away on the motorway. And I don't feel a load of vibration from everywhere. I'd be happy to sit for a good few hours on this on a motorway. But we're a bit more canny than that in Ireland. If we want to go around the Dolomites or the Pyrenees or wherever you want to go, we're not going to drive across Ireland and then drive around Birmingham through North Wales, round Birmingham, round the M6 and all that sort of stuff. We've had enough of all that crap. What we do is we take our bike down to Overlanders in Gorey. They put it on a big truck and take it to Memmingen in Germany. We get a €99 Ryanair flight, have a couple of scoops on the plane, get the other end, stop in a hotel near the airport, pick up our bike the next morning. No motorway driving necessary. So that's what we do here. So there's no reason for me to sit on a motorway for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles and waste 3 days getting to my destination, waste 3 days getting back. And for the cost of all the hotels and petrol doing it, it was cheaper to put this on a lorry, let them take it and get a Ryanair flight. So that's what we do here in Ireland. So I don't need a GS to do like 2,000 miles on a freeway to get somewhere or a motorway to get somewhere. What about agility of this bike? Well, now I have the suspension set up properly for me and my weight. The agility of this is great. It's just as good as the GS. Like, I can't wait. I'm going to the Dolomites in August and I can't wait for the GS2 up there. It's going to be great handling around there because the roads are going to be good. But, with an extra, with 45 kilos less on this and me having this set up right in the suspension, this would make a brilliant bike, a brilliant road bike over there, around the mountains and stuff like that. It'd be absolutely brilliant. I'd have no problems owning this bike as a solo bike once I've done 2-up work.
Right, I've got to wrap this video up. So I ended up testing plus 10 clicks over the stock rear preload, but then pared that back down to 18, which was my optimum. That would have left me preload adjustment for heavy gear or a pillion. So I was happy with that. Had I gone on a trip and loaded the bike up, I would have maxed out the rear preload and dropped the front fork preload by the recommended 1mm for optimum handling. I added 2 clicks of front compression damping. 3 was a little bit too harsh and 2 was just Goldilocks. Well, for me anyway. Rear rebound damping was added. I went from a stock 1.5 turns to 1 1/8, and this made a significant difference to the control of the bike. It added the ability to ride quite hard but with maximum comfort, but most of all control of that rear end. I wasn't being thrown back up. The adjustable damping is what makes this bike, to my mind. This is a bike with 240mm of suspension travel. There's no point in trying to over dampen this bike though. There's no point in not using it, so I was careful not to go overboard and over damp it. Otherwise I just would have bought a bike with 100mm of travel. That adjustable damping, used correctly, is worth so much more than an extra 10 or 20 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. The beauty of this 240mm suspension travel is that it gives this bike a very manageable seat height for my short 29-inch legs. If I allow for 25% sag at the rear, plus the static sag of maybe around 5%, my laden seat height is going to be rough and ready 800mm, down from 860. That's very manageable. On reflection too, I was quite harsh on its 2-up usefulness, but this is coming from a heavy person. A normal weight couple are going to have a large platform that will give them a perfect travelling ride from a suspension perspective. If they just follow the suspension setup Aprilia recommend in the user manual, I guarantee that will allow them to use all of that 80 horsepower on the road, where more powerful, non-adjustable suspended bikes will fade away behind them. My last nod too is the tank range. Aprilia are quoting 70 miles per gallon or 4 litres per 100 kilometres. Yeah, maybe a bit ambitious,
but with a tank of just shy of 4 imperial gallons, that's a very useful maximum 280 miles or 450 kilometers. And I'll have to end it there. Brilliant bike.